this is the final installment in that series we've been doing for the month of March, talking about the unique way that we look at Lent in Unity. We see Lent as an opportunity to sharpen our focus, to intensify our spiritual practice by giving up negative thinking instead of giving up food and luxuries and things like that. And it's not just about giving things up, because we also want to take the additional step of putting something positive in the place of the things that we're releasing. So this year we've been using a book called The Four Agreements as the source of our positive practices, and so far we've covered the first three agreements, which are: be impeccable with your word, don't take anything personally, and don't make assumptions. Today, the fourth agreement, which is always do your best. I have to confess, the first time that I looked at these four agreements, I was what you might call slightly underwhelmed. Because I thought, well, gosh, nothing really profound here. It looks very simple, nothing very, very deep, until you start unpacking them and actually trying to apply these agreements in our lives. That's when we can really start to see how these deceptively simple agreements really can improve every area of our lives. So the fourth agreement: always do your best. Well, of course, duh. Reminds me of my Boy Scout days. I learned this all the way back when I was a Boy Scout. Anyone remember, any of the guys out there remember the Boy Scout oath that you would have to take at every single meeting? You would stand up, you would raise your hand, and you would make the scouting symbol, and you would say, "Live long and prosper." Oh, wait a second. No, that's Star Trek. I'm all mixed up here. That's the Boy Scout oath. Three fingers. On my honor, I will do my best to do my duty, yada, yada, yada. Yeah. Isn't that amazing? I can hear that it has been like burned into the consciousness because you'd say it at every official event. And no one ever once invited me to reflect on what that actually meant. Maybe in some of your troops they did, but it was never discussed. What does it mean to do your best? What am I taking an oath to really do here? Who decides what is my best? What standard is used? Do I have to be perfect, or is excellent sufficient? How about just good enough or adequate? If I think I could have done better next time, then I didn't do my best, did I? And don't we always think that we can do better next time, right? So if that's true, then I can never do my best. So why bother? You see, I've just talked myself out of it. See how easy it is to do? I call it the Homer Simpson approach. The man who once said, "If something is too hard to do, then it's not worth doing." And who also said, "You tried your best and you failed miserably. The lesson is, never try." And of course, we all know what Master Yoda would have to say about that. He would say, do or do not. There is no try. So, doing our best. It's not about perfection. It's not about living up to other people's standards and expectations. It's not about striving and trying. Here is what Don Miguel Ruiz means by doing your best, according to his book, The Four Agreements. He says, doing your best is taking action because you love it, not because you're expecting a reward. Most people do exactly the opposite. They only take action when they expect a reward, and they don't enjoy the action, and that's the reason why they don't do their best. Okay, that's easy enough to understand. I have to wonder if it's entirely realistic, though. Can we really love everything that we do? I can honestly say that I love what I do here at Unity of Auburn as minister. Not everything, though, because I can think of an example about a year ago, almost exactly a year ago. We had a sewer backup here at the church. Nasty stuff. We called the plumber, they cleared the pipes, and Karen and I had to clean up the mess because we had an event that was coming on too quickly to be able to take the time to try to get a team together or call in a professional or whatever. It had to be done, and I honestly cannot say we loved it, but we did it. And when we were done, you couldn't tell that anything had happened. No, sir, we didn't like it one bit, but it had to be done. It was ours to do. So we literally held our noses and waded in. Sometimes the effort has to be for the sake of the effort. We do something right for the sake of doing it right because it needs to be done and it's ours to do. You've probably heard the saying, if not us, then who? If not now, then when? That was said by this guy, Congressman John Lewis, back in the civil rights days when he was one of the original freedom riders. That was back in the days when the Supreme Court had ruled that segregated public buses were unconstitutional, but there were many southern states that decided to ignore the ruling and kept on segregating their buses and their lunch counters and everything else. So the Freedom Riders went to those segregated states and they rode on the buses with white people. They sat at the white-only lunch counters, and I don't think they loved getting beaten and arrested or when the buses were cleared out and set on fire. I don't think they loved any of that. But I think we can say that love had a big role in what they did. They did it because they loved freedom. And they were willing to pay the price that it would take to raise consciousness. I read something once that said that the leaders of the civil rights movement, they were marching with the Constitution in one hand and the Bible in the other hand. And that makes me reflect on, during these weeks leading up to Easter, it leads me to reflect on the great example that's left to us by Jesus when he walked into that lion's den known as Jerusalem all those years ago. He knew full well what he was going to be getting into. He was willing to pay the price that it would take to raise consciousness. And there were many who believed that maybe Jesus was going to raise an army, drive the Romans out of town, and then overthrow their own corrupt leaders. But as history tells us, the only weapons that Jesus had was a message, truth, determination, love for his vision of the kingdom of heaven. You know, talk about a guy who did his best. Jesus knew what the end game was probably going to be, but he never slowed down. He never watered down his message. Jesus knew that the Romans would routinely kill people who stirred things up and defy their authority. Capital punishment was the rule, not the exception. And the ones that they wanted to make real examples of, they crucified. Now Jesus, he could out-preach, he could out-debate just about anyone in that day. He'd have made a great trial lawyer. And in the days leading up to Good Friday, there were all sorts of clever people who tried to trip him up, and they failed every single time. So we have to wonder, what was it that kept him moving forward with that kind of determination and focus? I doubt that he was loving some of the things that were going to happen to him, but the question is, do you have to be the Son of God with supernatural powers in order to do what Jesus did and put those values into action, put it all on the line like that? In his book, The Week That Changed the World, Unity minister Ernest Wilson, he tells the story of what happened between Palm Sunday and Easter Sunday, and here's what he has to say. He says, Jesus was possessed by a divine purpose. He said that when a man has a big enough sense of purpose, he loses himself, yet finds a greater self in his absorption or dedication to the purpose. So that's what it was all about. He had a purpose and a vision that not even those closest to him shared. And that's what kept him going. I like that line where he says, he loses himself, yet finds a greater self. Because once again, what we're seeing there is that all-important distinction between the small, ego-driven self and our higher self. The higher self that Jesus manifested as the great example. In Unity, we like to call that higher self the Christ, or the Christ consciousness, because it was the state of consciousness that was demonstrated by the man named Jesus. It's the small self that likes to tell us that certain activities are too boring, or they're beneath our dignity, things like that. Homer Simpson, he's the voice of the small self. And we need people around like that to remind us of what that sounds like. He's the anti-hero. We need those characters to remind us how easy it is to give in and fall short in our agreements. Homer reminds us that we've all done and said the same things at one time or another. So there he is, trying to decide which voice he's going to listen to. The small self or the other guy, the higher self. That's a decision that we all have to make. And our agreement, one of the agreements that flows with all four of the agreements, is that we are trying to discern and listen to and follow the voice of our higher self, the Christ consciousness, the Christ within, as we say in Unity. So our higher self, our Christ consciousness, wants us to have that kind of big sense of purpose that helped Jesus to do what he did. Doesn't mean grandiose. Just has to be clear and compelling. It can be something as simple as loving life. My purpose is to love life and to help other people discover how to do that for themselves. It includes my own interests, and it also includes the well-being of others. That's all it has to be. Something that gets you out of bed in the morning. Makes you get up and go through the day and sometimes do some of the things that maybe aren't all that pleasant, but we do it because it supports that higher purpose. So it's not a matter of loving every single individual activity in the sense that we enjoy it or we have fun doing it. It's a matter of loving our larger purpose in life so that every single activity we engage in to support that life is seen by us as so important that it deserves the full measure of our attention and our best effort. If our larger purpose is worthy, then everything we do in furtherance of that purpose is worthy of our best effort. That's how it works. Sometimes I hear people who speak, derisively of minimum wage jobs. Sometimes the example that's used is being a burger flipper, at McDonald's or Burger King, whatever, considered to be demeaning. Why? Why? If you're in love with your life, you will gladly do whatever it takes. And if that means flipping burgers, then we make sure that we're the best burger flipper we know how to be. So that when we move on to whatever comes next, they're going to look back and say, wow, that guy was some kind of burger flipper, And we have to be a little careful that the ego doesn't hijack our desire to do our best and use it as a way to feed itself or to demonstrate our superiority. That's the other side of the coin. Hey, the company expects me to flip 50 burgers an hour, whatever it is. I'll do 100. I'll really show them how it's done. I'll show them. That's the ego speaking. And when that happens, well, we're not doing our best, are we? We're showing off. We're showing off. We're coming from a place really of insecurity. There we are, back looking for that reward. We're looking for the charge of people who say, wow, here, showed me, didn't you? That kind of thing. We're coming from a place of insecurity rather than integrity and love for life. We have to be a little cautious about our striving because the ego can take anything. Literally anything, even if we think it's spiritual, the ego can take it and use it for its own purposes. I've been reading a great little book recently called The Dude and the Zen Master. It's by the actor Jeff Bridges, and Bernie Glassman, who is indeed a legitimate Zen master. So early on in the book, Jeff talks about his spiritual background. And I wasn't aware of this before. He talks about his spiritual background. He says, from the beginning, my mother used to pass around the daily word, which was my basic spiritual training when I was growing up. It comes from Unity, which is Christian-based and also very open. I think it has a lot of Zen Buddhist leanings. She would pass it around and make all the kids read it. That probably explains why I'm such a big fan of Jeff Bridges and his movies. And there it is. I didn't know that. So later on in this book, The Dude and the Zen Master, they're talking about this problem that can arise when the ego gets a hold of our expectations. And instead of doing our best, we're striving for the reward. We're trying to do things to get people to admire us, to praise us, to recognize us, and things like that. And what ends up happening is that the striving becomes so all-consuming, we focus on the reward, we lose our sense of purpose, and it becomes a drag. And sometimes we can't function. We don't even want to take action anymore because we're so worried about being able to get it perfectly so that people will admire us and praise us. Life becomes a drag and everything slows down and we fail to take action. That's what can happen. So they're talking about that. Jeff talks about some more advice that he got from his very wise mother. He says this, years later when she sent me off to work, she'd always say, remember, have fun and don't take it too seriously. So I have this word for much of what I do in life, plorking. I'm not playing and I'm not working, I'm plorking. And there he is, plorking his way all the way to an Academy Award. Not too shabby. The Oscar wasn't the goal. The Oscar wasn't the goal. The process was what it was all about. The Oscar was the bonus that came from him doing his best, not taking himself too seriously, not letting the ego get a hold of all those things that we want to do and taking that purpose and turning it into something else. So today I'm going to give Jeff Bridges the last word about how we might want to go about doing our best. He suggests this. He says, live like you're already dead, man. Have a good time. Do your best. Let it all come ripping right through you. That's how we bypass the ego and learn what it means to do our best. So happy plorking everyone this week, and we'll see you next Sunday.